Welcome back, everybody, to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm very excited to get off to another edition of 32 picks, 32 days, 32 teams, as we now have the 9th overall pick on the board. The Cincinnati Bengals, in this segment for this episode, are on the clock. Cincinnati has had a weird run within the last decade or so that Marvin Lewis has been their head coach. Going to the playoffs, going one and done, time and time again, and Marvin Lewis is still there. I like continuity. I like Marvin Lewis, but it's been very interesting for Cincinnati to have him on board for this long. I don't think, as far as them going one and done, is necessarily his fault. He's continuing to put them in the position to be in the playoffs, which is more than what I could say for the next franchise I'll be talking about, the Buffalo Bills. But they just haven't made it to that next level. Their defense is always there. Their defense plays somewhat beyond their potential based on the personnel that they have. Those players play beyond their potential. Is Andy Dalton the guy to win the Super Bowl for the Bengals? I don't know. A.J. Green, dynamic talent. One of the best wide receivers in the NFL, easily, along with Julio Jones and Beckham and Brown. But you can't have just one guy out there. And to me, a big loss for them was the loss of Mohamed Sanu, going from Cincy to Atlanta. And it showed for Atlanta what he was able to do for Atlanta, being that number 2 guy behind Julio Jones. He took on that role. He's a number 2 wideout. He played the role specifically to what that offense needs and fit the role very well. So there's a lot of needs for every team in the NFL draft. Going into the NFL draft, each team has needs, and Cincinnati has needs as well. But like I said, most of the time when you have a player leave, it's definitely warranted that you need to replace him. It's duly noted that you need to replace him. And you can't have one guy out there being that guy. You have Tyler Eifert, who's a dynamic talent, a great tight end, one of the best tight ends in the NFL. But time and time again, Marvin Lewis has proven whether or not they have defensive needs that can plug and play a player in that scheme, in Marvin Lewis's scheme, as he so successfully ran during his days in Baltimore. And they're able to kind of adapt to the situation on the defensive side of the ball. On the offensive side of the ball, they're not. And I think they've felt the loss of Jay Gruden since he left and took the head coaching job in Washington. But if you can't tell what direction I'm going in for the Bengals, the direction I would go in at this point on the board would be wide receiver. There's a couple wide receivers in this year's draft that are appealing. Mike Williams, John Ross just ran a 4.22 40. Mike Williams had a great career at Clemson. But the guy I'm going with here, 9th overall for the Cincinnati Bengals, is Corey Davis, wide receiver, 6'3", 215, out of Western Michigan. Obviously, the end part, out of Western Michigan, the biggest knock on Davis heading out of college is the fact that he played in the MAC conference, which isn't known. It's not known as one of the better conferences in college football. The SEC is the powerhouse, and then you have the Big 12 or Big 10 or whatever they changed it to over the course of the last few years. College has changed so much, even in the last 4 years, that I honestly... I keep up with the players. I don't necessarily keep up with college itself. But Corey Davis, 6'3", 215, he's drawn comparisons to Terrell Owens. He was a 2-star recruit out of Illinois. He had academic problems, came from a rough side of the tracks, really proved himself going from the 2-star recruit that he was to what he will be in this year's draft, a first-round draft pick. He was the MAC Freshman of the Year in 2013. He had 67 catches. 941 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Then he turned his name into a first-team all-conference player for the first of 3 times in 2014 by leading the conference with 1,408 yards, 15 touchdowns, which was third in the FBS, and Davis was among the nation's leading receivers as a junior before garnering first-team All-American honors in 2016 by ranking in the top 10 in the 3 major receiving categories, 97 catches, which was 8th, 1,500 yards, which was 7th, and 19 touchdowns, tied for first. Great, outstanding 4-year production. I talked about that with a few of the players that I talked about in picks past, which I won't say who, I won't name names, but I'm big on a guy having 4 solid years of collegiate production, seeing him progress in college. And Corey Davis is probably one of the only guys that I could sit here and say actually did it right. He earned his keep, went from 2-star recruit to Central Michigan, a MAC school, a small school, and became one of the best receivers in this year's draft. Some say the best receiver in this year's draft, representing the MAC. Good for him. Good for him. He's a tough guy, plays with a huge chip on his shoulder, and he's not afraid to take on a heavy target workload. Does that sound familiar? He sounds like Terrell Owens. Came from a small school, big guy, 6'2", 6'3", wants the ball in his hands on every single play if possible, does not like to come off the field, and is a true competitor in every sense of the imagination. In every sense of the word, he is a true competitor. Tracks the ball down as well as anyone in college. He's a deep ball guy, understands coverages of stacking corners and keeping them on his hip. And as far as his second gear, he can take it to the house on a short route. He's not unable to get the yak. He can go after the yak yards. So his best attribute is his ability to stretch the field with his vertical routes, and he can get separation. As soon as the ball is in his hands, he has that ability, once the ball is in his hands, to create distance between himself and the DB that's covering him. So there are times, in his career where he didn't always play the top competition. So it's tough to gauge how he will translate to the National Football League, but he has a lot of attributes physically that will attribute to his success in the NFL. A big guy, a guy that can really keep things moving for your team, can go up and get the ball. There were times where he was double teamed. He did just fine. He made his due. He was a man among boys as far as him in the MAC. A touchdown machine and a guy that has route running and ball skills to become a starter in the league, and a competitive guy, a guy that produces in the red zone. So that's who I have going to the Bengals, 9th overall. Corey Davis. You'll have A.J. Green, who is going to be in the league for quite a few years to come. But once it's time for A.J. to go to another team, if he loses a step, you have a guy in Corey Davis who will be a number 1 wideout, in my eyes, in the National Football League for many years to come. It's a good thing. It's the right fit for him to go to this team because of the fact that A.J. Green's already here. It will help him as a receiver. Andy Dalton needs as many weapons around him as possible. I don't think he's a guy that can win a Super Bowl with limited talent around him. Not many quarterbacks can, but we're talking about the best in the league. Brady, Rodgers. If Dalton has Green, Davis, there's attributes about Andy Dalton that don't jump off the tape to me. When I watch him head-to-head, if he's playing a team I like to watch in the Buffalo Bills in games past, he's not a guy that really wows me. He's not a guy that really makes me think, man, he's really good. He's decent. He's okay. But if he didn't have A.J. Green, if he didn't have Mohamed Sanu when he did, if he didn't have Tyler Eifert, and they just plugged and played Andy Dalton, he would be one of the worst quarterbacks in this league, in my opinion. He's got a lot of weapons around him, a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things, and Corey Davis would be one of them. You look at that division, as I have with every one of these shows, 32 teams, 32 picks, 32 days. You look at their division, the Steelers have firepower, no doubt about it. In order for the Bengals to leapfrog Baltimore and not really leapfrog the Browns, but in order for them to go toe-to-toe with the Steelers, I think they're the consensus number one team in that division, the Pittsburgh Steelers are. In order for them to go drive for drive, tit for tat, touchdown for touchdown, field goal for field goal, whatever you want to call it, with the Steelers, the Bengals need as much offensive firepower as possible, even over-the-top firepower. And some would say Corey Davis at 9 would be a bit of a reach in terms of over-the-top. They do have corner needs. They do have safety needs, much like a lot of teams in the National Football League. But this is one of the deepest corner safety classes in quite some time. And I think they're enamored with Corey Davis, what he brings to the table as a number 2 for now and as an eventual number 1 wide receiver. I don't think that could be scoffed at or ignored. So that was my take on the Cincinnati Bengals. Who should the Bengals take? Marvin Lewis, great coach, great guy, from what I've seen. I think he belongs there. I think they need to give continuity as much of a chance as possible because I think the players are playing for him. There's that Pittsburgh game where Vontae Burfict made that stupid tackle that crushed Antonio Brown, that basically threw their season down the toilet. Moments like that are not Marvin Lewis's fault. That's on the players. The players need to be held accountable by the head coach, which I think they are, and I think they will be from here on out. That was my take. 9th overall, I got the Cincinnati Bengals taking Central Michigan wide receiver Corey Davis, as I believe that is the first wide receiver off my board. The first one gone at 9, a guy from the MAC. How about that? Tune in to part 2, 10th overall. We got the Buffalo Bills on the clock. I'm expecting this one to be a highly rated, highly tuned in episode, highly tuned in part of the segment on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Drive safe. Nobody else is.